hopefully. Good day, ladies and gents, wherever you may be around the world, and welcome to Splendid Isolation History number 4. Alright, I think I've done all my boomer stuff now. As always, guys, I'm going to start us off with a bit of a tune.
Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best ye breed. Go bind your sons to exile, to serve your captives' need. To wait in heavy harness on flooded folk and wild. Your new God's sullen peoples have devil and have child. Take up the white man's burden, in patience to abide, to veil the threat of terror and check the show of pride. By open speech and simple, 100 times made plain, to seek another's profit and work another's gain. Take up the white man's burden, the savage wars of peace. Fill full the mouth of famine and bid the sickness cease. And when your goal is nearest, the end for others sought, what's love that heed and folly, bring all your hopes to naught. Take up the white man's burden, no tawdry rule of kings, but toil of serf and sweeper, the tale of common things. The ports ye shall not enter, the roads ye shall not tread. Go make them with your living and mark them with your dead. Take up the white man's burden and reap his old reward. The blame of those ye better, the hate of those ye guard. The cry of those ye humor are slowly towards the light. Why brought ye us from bondage, our loved Egyptian night? Take up the white man's burden, ye dare not stoop to less, nor call too loud on freedom to cloak your weariness. By all ye cry or whisper, by all ye leave or do, the silent, sullen people shall wail gods and you. Take up the white man's burden, have done with childish days, the lightly profit laurel, the easy ungrudged praise. Come down to search your manhood through all the thankless years. No age will give what wisdom the judgment of your peers. Take off the white man's burden through all the thankless years.
And that was, of course, the excellent Chris Card. Go and check out his YouTube channel, guys. It's very good. And he is one of our friends. So, yeah, I'm happy to say we're here this evening to talk about one of the greatest British naval victories in history. It was one of Nelson's great victories, but also generally belongs to the officers and men of the Royal Navy, because they won this battle through, yes, to some degree, Nelson's tactical nous, but also through sheer brilliant seamanship, aggression, and gunnery as well. And I'm happy to have guests AI and Mitch with us this evening. How are you going, gentlemen?
All right. Hello, everybody.
This was actually AI's suggestion that we do this week, so I have to bow to him on that one, which was an excellent suggestion, because the Battle of the Nile is a really excellent British victory. I have invited, by the way, Hitman, and I hope he comes on, because he could talk to us a little bit about the French and Napoleonic strategy of trying to attack India via Egypt, which is not my area of expertise, although I generally understand what they were up to and how stupid it was. But, you know,
the idea was that Napoleon would capture Egypt, and then through the Red Sea, through Egypt and the Red Sea, they would then send aid and support to like the Mysore kingdom, who were at war with Britain, and it was basically I believe it was, and I think many sort of the Napoleonic historians sort of tend to believe that this might have been a potential future launch pad for Napoleonic war efforts in India itself, like direct action.
Difficult to see how they could have done that, to be honest. But yes, you're entirely correct, AI. The French were looking to support Tipu's Sultan. And if you go to the Victoria and Albert Museum these days, actually, I don't know these days, but it used to be on display. Tipu Sultan, who was very anti-British until we killed him with sabers, he had this mechanical tiger that was mauling an Englishman. And when I was a boy, you could still go to the Victoria and Albert Museum and see this mechanical monstrosity where this Indian tiger was mauling an Englishman. And that belonged to Tipu Sultan, Tipu Tib, I think he was called at the time. And eventually, of course, the Brits captured his city and killed him. Quite right.
Yeah, well, so and Wellington, the real Iron Duke himself was involved with it. It was one of his first major campaigns.
It was, and it was in India that Wellington learnt the importance. Mitch is saying the Battle of Versailles, etc. Yeah, absolutely. But it was in India that Wellington first learned the vital importance of logistics to an army. And Napoleon later dismissed Wellington as a sepoy general. He was a general of Indian soldiers. He didn't know anything, which didn't work out too well for Napoleon at Waterloo anyway. And it didn't work out too well for Napoleon's assorted marshals in Spain and Portugal either. But, there we go. But, and of course, this is one of Nelson's 3 great victories. And in many respects, not in many respects, but in some respects, it's better than Trafalgar, because for a start, Nelson doesn't die, which is always really good.
He does think at one point he is dead. He actually says it himself. He's like, they've killed me.
He was always a little bit dramatic, was Nelson. But yeah, but he would always wear every single decoration he'd ever been given on the deck of the ship, even though other officers said to him, "You know what? Maybe, Horatio, this is not the best thing to do," but he would always insist on it anyway. So
Yeah, no, he was a real one for that, you know.
Yeah, he wanted to be outstanding, did Nelson. And one of the things you have to understand about Nelson is he did not come from an amazingly glorious high aristocracy British family. His father was like a vicar. His father was a vicar in Norfolk,
Yeah, they were from like just like country gentry stock. I mean, they were
Yeah,
not anything significant. Not like Wellesley. I mean, Wellesley came from the Anglo-Irish sort of landowning aristocracy.
yes,
Um, I mean, but to be fair, even they were looked down upon by the aristocracy in the mainland. But
yes.
you know, Wells, but yeah, Nelson, he was not from that. And actually, that it does remind me. There is a documentary out there, a separate one that you can about the life of Nelson. I believe it was with the chap you interviewed, and Jonathan Bowden, and some other. I think Nick Griffin was also in there as well for it. And it was
Yeah,
like a
he was
yeah.
involved in that, yes. It was actually a very good documentary. If you go back and watch the stream I did with Eddie, I can't remember what his surname is now, but yeah, if you can go and watch that in our videos. But yeah, look, Nelson came from a middling British family. I think that'd be fair, wouldn't it, AI?
Yeah, he was yeah, his father being a vicar, he had access to a formal education, more, you know, like a further standard of education than everyone else. So yeah, you know, he was well suited for that you know, the position he would go into. And you know, he sort of made a name for himself in the West Indies, really, like in his earlier what was it, enforcing like British
Yep.
taxes on
Yep,
and everything, which
during and just after the American War of Independence, yes, absolutely.
yeah.
And the thing was, I mean, I was talking to Mitch about this before we went on air. The difference between the Royal Navy and the British Army in the Nelson era, in the late 18th century, was that in the Royal Navy, because the Royal Navy it required you to be professional to be a good officer in the Royal Navy. You had to know how to navigate, for example. Yeah.
Yeah.
And also running a warship was a very complicated thing because of all the rigging and the yards and sails and all the rest of it. And so the Royal Navy, unlike the British Army, was always pretty professional. In order to become an officer in the Royal Navy, in the British Army, you could buy a commission. Yeah, you if you were rich enough, you could buy a cornet ship or an ensign ship for your son, and he would go and join his regiment and basically learn on the job. But you couldn't do that in the Royal Navy because an incompetent officer on a Royal Navy warship would run that warship aground and destroy it, at best, or do something bad in bad weather or whatever it might be. So in the Royal Navy, you basically, if you wanted to become a Royal Navy officer, you needed to join when you were a young man, usually like 13 or 12 or 14, somewhere around that era. I think Nelson joined the Navy when he was 14, I think. I'm right in saying, AI?
Yeah, he was 14, 15. Now he was. The funny thing is, he was quite old, which I know, which sounds a bit mad to
Yeah,
say,
yeah,
but for many he was considered old. And if people watch, if it's probably good 'cause it's in the books as well. But if you watch the first episode of the Hornblower of the first
yep.
season, which was really
I
good, really.
watched it yesterday. AI. I watched that. I watched that with my girl yesterday. The even chance. Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, yeah. The
Yeah,
first
yeah.
episode,
And
and
Hawker is an old. He's an old. He's an old midshipman. But Nelson was
yeah.
younger than him.
Yeah, Nelson was, but you what you see is, I mean, I think Hornblower that's meant to be like 16 or something like that, 16,
Yeah.
17, and he gets berated when he goes there. You know, he's surrounded by these 12-year-olds and stuff, 12 and 13-year-olds, and every single sailor says, "Aren't you a little bit old? What are you doing here? You're far too old." And it's, you know, that is the
Mm.
sort of attitude because, and on the job, and what they're taught navigation, they're taught all the aspects of manning and maintaining a ship, and it's sort of like they were it's quite accurate to basically how many of these, you know, naval figures that we will talk
Yeah.
about, how they
100%.
how they were
100%.
taught.
And I think I'm right in saying that Nelson was like, what, 13, 14 when he joined the Navy, I think.
Yeah, wasn't it his uncle that got him in? Got him
Yes.
in. Yeah,
Sutcliffe.
yeah.
Sutcliffe.
That that's right, Sutcliffe. Yeah.
Sutcliffe was a Royal Navy captain. And if you were a Royal Navy captain, you were allowed to suggest boys who could join as midshipmen, who were basically trainee officers. But this is the other difference between the Royal Navy and the British Army of those days, is that there was also at the same time, and I was talking to Mitch about this before we started, at the same time, there was always a regular method of educated ordinary sailors. Now, you had to be educated in the sense that you had to be able to read and write, you had to be able to navigate, because unless you could do those three things, you could not be an officer, obviously enough.
No.
But if you were an ordinary sailor who joined the Royal Navy and you could read and write and you could navigate, there was always, even in the middle of the 18th century, there was always a regular method as to how, if you were outstandingly good, you could become an officer. And that was, you could become a master's mate. And if you became a master's mate, from there, you could be made a midshipman.
I mean that is the route of Captain Cook because I mean, you know, he started his naval career very, very late. I mean, really, really late. But he was, I mean, I think with Captain Cook, he was he was already an accomplished mathematician. He was very good in mathematician, and
He was a regular merchant sailor, AI. And as
as
I
well,
was
yeah.
and as I was saying to Mitch, he started his career on ships that used to carry coal from Newcastle down to London.
Yeah, so he wasn't like a total unknown.
No.
No,
But
no, no, no.
he came. His family were. I think the best way you could describe them is Cook's family were respectable working class. Okay. They
Yes.
weren't in any way, shape, or form middle class. But they were respectable working class. They, like, his dad had a reasonable job that he always kept. And originally Cook was going to be he was going to be apprenticed to somebody doing, I don't know, cloth or something. And Cook thought that was really boring, and he thought, "Fuck this, I'm going to go to sea." And so he went to sea, and he got involved in ships, merchant ships that used to take coal from Newcastle down to London, because, you know, London was this massive metropolis and it needed a hell of a lot of coal. And while Cook was on this ship, and he'd had some education, but he could read and write, and while he was on these coal ships, he learned to navigate. So then he joins the Royal Navy as an ordinary sailor, wasn't an officer. He joined as an ordinary sailor. But when Britain was fighting the 7 Years' War, he was in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and Britain needed sailors who could work out where warships could go on the St. Lawrence River and where they couldn't go. So, how much war was under their keel so they didn't go onto rocks and all this kind of stuff. And under fire from the French, very often, Cook would go in a rowboat with a group of sailors, and he would use a lead, which was a literal lead weight on a very long line, and a chart, which he would write himself under fire from the French, and he would work out, here we've got this depth, here we got this depth, here we got this depth. So the Royal Navy officers could then work out, well, okay, our warship can go this close inshore, at this point. And that was how Cook was commissioned. But he was already a master's mate when he was in the Navy at this stage. And there was always this absolutely established track that a really good ordinary sailor who could read and write and navigate could be a master's mate, and then he could be made a midshipman, and then he'd become a lieutenant, which was the difference between the Army and the Navy, because you had to be professional to be a Royal Navy officer. Dead air, boys, dead air.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah, now I can hear me. Yeah, so you had to be professional to be a Royal Navy officer, and Cook became a Royal Navy officer just because he was a good and brave master's mate who regularly were turned into midshipmen and then lieutenants. It was very common. Like if you watch the movie Master and Commander, which Mitch has as his avatar at the moment, Pullings in that started life as a master's mate, and was then promoted to midshipman and then lieutenant.
Wasn't he? I'm just going to take my dog out in a minute, Andrew, so I'm going to be off for a few minutes. But
that's all right. I will never say you can't take your dog out, man. I like all dogs and a fair number of people.
No, but wasn't his character at the Battle of the Nile on HMS Goliath?
Yeah, could be. I know Aubrey was supposed to be at the Battle of the Nile because all the British officers at the Battle of the Nile got a Nile medal because it was such a brilliant victory.
Yeah, it's actually it's great. There's this one instance which is like the big explosive instance, so you know what I mean, Andrew, when I say that. I've got account from an English source and a French source, and when you compare the two, it's really shocking because it's basically the exact same. What happened? Exact same information, which is I tell you what, French control of the Med was pretty much killed. It killed off any idea for Napoleon having significant control of the Mediterranean.
100
completely killed off that day.
100%. I've got to ask you something, AI. What's your dog called?
He's called Ferdinand.
Oh, what sort of dog is he, mate?
Whippet.
Nice. They're good dogs.
Yeah. All right, I'll be back in a bit.
All right, mate. Give him a nice little walk. That's cool. Mitch, anything to add at this point, mate?
So I'll go into on the so the Royal Navy, had to be meritocratic because it was a legit matter of security for us, given its importance to making sure the French never invaded. As for the British Army, they had commissions, but it didn't quite. But the sharp books kind of distort how Because I mean, for example, let's say you wanted to become a major in the British Army, you had to spend some time, let's say, as a colonel before you could become a
Oh,
major.
yeah, there was a limit. Yeah, absolutely, Mitch. I'm sorry. Thank you for pointing that out. You couldn't just go from one rank to another like every 3 months or so. That you did have to spend so many years at a particular rank. Yeah, that's true. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you for reminding me. That is absolutely true.
The other thing is, I think like because apparently the reason why we have commissions was so let's say someone like Arthur Wellesley, if he was able to buy a commission, that proved that he could buy supplies for his troops because you got a factor. Because because the British Army, of course, had a tradition of we don't live off the land like the French do. So if we were to take food from let's say a Spanish peasant, we at least compensate them, and that's why all our officers had to be aristocrats because they would have money.
Well, there's that. I think it was also the fact that that in those days they thought that if you had a certain amount of money, you would be to some degree like integrated with the system, if that makes any sense. I think there was some of that too. Whereas in the Royal Navy, you just couldn't do that. Like you can't risk even a little Royal Navy brig, say in the 18th century, would have had 50 or 60 men on it. So you just couldn't risk 50 or 60 men because the man in charge had no idea of what to do. That would have been pretty crazy. I think there's some truth in that.
Yeah, and because just a little tidbit and people don't because so when Cromwell, for example, invaded Ireland with his new model army, people think like Cromwell was fully ruthless with the Irish. Actually, no. And the thing was, let's say the new model army was saying, let's say a couple of soldiers were found plundering from a farm. Cromwell would have us 2 men hanged soon as. It's very similar disciplinary attitude compared to what the real Iron Duke would do to his men.
Yeah, well, Wellington was pretty strict. He was. Wellington realized that he couldn't have like the Portuguese and then the Spanish becoming big time enemies. He did realize that. I think Wellington was occasionally too harsh, but that's just me. But yeah, fair enough. Tricky Woo is talking about the Gregory Peck movie, Captain Hornblower. Yeah, it's an okay movie. I don't hate it. I mean, it's nowhere near as good as the Patrick O'Brien, Aubrey Maturin novels, or Master and Commander, which Mitch has got as his avatar this evening. I've got nothing against Semi-Agog Vex Peril. I like Semi-Agog. I'd actually like to do another stream with Semi-Agog, to be honest. But yeah, whatever.
Yeah. I don't know if Hitman's coming on because he did retweet the stream earlier, so I don't know if like you want but I don't know if you want to set the scene now in terms of the lead up to the Battle of the Nile.
Well, look, yeah, I guess I'm gonna because like if Hitman's gonna join us, he'll join us, and if he's not, he's not. But yeah, basically France during the Revolution and Napoleon, who at this stage is still just a French general, was sent to Egypt. And the idea was they would go to Egypt and from there, one way or another, put pressure on the British Empire towards India. I think it was always a pretty dumb idea, but given the Royal Navy was stronger than the French Navy, I think it was always a pretty dumb idea. But yeah, that was their point. I would say, Mitch, unless you want to disagree.
Yeah, I somewhat remember as basically Napoleon was chasing for glory in Egypt because it's a bit of a misnomer, but before Napoleon invaded, we had no idea whatsoever of what Egypt had in terms of archaeological discoveries to be had. Now, Napoleon chased for a great sense of glory to be had there, because, for example, men like Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar had already conquered there, and even after the Italian campaign, Napoleon had this great sense of thinking he was like a Julius Caesar reborn or something in terms of military exploits. So there was also that. And it was, but yeah, because the thing was, Napoleon didn't think the Royal Navy were much of a threat, because even with the Battle of Cape St. Vincent, he thought, okay, well, the Spanish are on side with the French, and their combined Mediterranean fleets were greater than what we could station in the Mediterranean, because at this point we only really had Gibraltar as a
Yeah,
guarantee.
Britain had largely withdrawn the Royal Navy from the Med for a limited time. Although when Britain found out via various spies, etc., that the French were launching an expedition, Nelson was given this little fleet, relatively little fleet, and told to go into the Mediterranean and find what the damn frogs are doing. I will also say Bill Tavern in the set says, if you can't have a dog, can I suggest a budgie? They sing when you come home. I know a girl who's got a couple of budgies, but but anyway, but I like budgies, but I'm more of a dog fan, to be honest. But anyway, leaving that aside. So yeah, when the British government became aware that France was launching a fleet and an army somewhere in the Mediterranean, they gave Nelson a relatively little fleet and said, go and find where they are, and then kill them, basically. Which, that was really good orders to give Nelson, because he was good at those things. And budgies are indeed from Australia, Bill Tavern, that's true. They're all green, the wild ones, by the way. But yeah. And of course, Nelson, first of all, captured Malta from the Knights of Malta, and the Knights of Malta had held Malta for hundreds of years against Muslim invasions and all sorts of things.
It was like 1566, I believe, if I remember getting the date right, where the Knights of St. John, they defended it from the Ottomans, who tried to take it because, of course, Malta is a valuable port. However, the Knights of St. John has since declined into just being an order hated by the locals. So when Napoleon comes along and annexes it into the French Empire, or should say French Republic at this time, given it was still a dog absolutely in charge. And the thing was, so I believe it was, if I remember correctly, it was just so Nelson knew that the French had sailed past Sicily. But it's at that point he knew they were headed for Egypt. And at one point, in chasing, I think it was like somewhere west of Crete, they were like 24 hours away from meeting one another. And the only reason why the French were able to get away was because of fog. So in another timeline where that fog didn't intervene, Nelson would have found the French, and Napoleon would have been taken captive aboard.
It would have been so great. Yeah, I agree, Mitch. Had that action happened, almost certainly Napoleon would have been captured, and the Napoleonic Wars would have finished, I don't know, at least 10 years earlier than they did.
Do you know what? What's crazy? Because I've just been listening, so I know where you just covered the capture of Malta, and the British fleet. Because what happened was, if I remember correctly, Nelson overshot Napoleon, got to Alexandria first, off the coast of Egypt.
Yep.
There was no French army, and he spoke to like the Mamluk Ottoman administrators there, and they were a bit confused because they were saying, no, we haven't seen anybody. And then as soon as they set off, and then 24 hours later, Napoleon arrived with his army, and they landed at Alexandria. And by that time, Nelson had gone northwards towards Cyprus and Palestine, Syria region, so that he was, and then he went back to Sicily, and then when he got back to Sicily, he then heard of what the French had landed. But I think there was one I got a book here that was on a biography of Nelson, and it says here that when in transit, when both fleets were in transit, they reckon there was one point where they were only 8 miles from each other, the fleets,
Yep.
and didn't see each other.
Just bad luck from the Royal Navy's point of view and from Britain's point of view, because, I mean, as Mitch said, if that action had happened, Napoleon would have almost certainly been captured, at least, even if he wasn't killed. And Britain would have won the Napoleonic Wars probably 10 years earlier. And maybe Nelson might not have even died at Trafalgar,
I mean, in all fairness, just to give a bit of context at the time, Napoleon at this point was just a general.
Yep.
France was governed by a republic of chambers, and this was just before he was declared like first citizen, like consul of the French Republic. So he was just
a fair bit before that, but yeah.
So I think at this time, he was he was a known French general, because he had already conquered most of northern Italy, and already kicked the Austrians out of northern Italy. So he was well known in Europe anyway, as like the hero of the French Republic and the Revolution and everything.
Some of the revolutionaries, by sending him to Egypt, were trying to get rid of him, to be honest. But yeah.
Yep. And
yeah.
Even in his defeat in Egypt, because of the Battle of Nile and having to leave because of just being cut off, even when he returned back to France, he did still turn it around as a victory somehow. I mean, I don't know how he managed it, but
yeah, especially when he abandoned his army in Egypt and fled, and like just a couple of days ago was Abukir Bay Day, when a British army was landed from a Royal Navy fleet in the face of the French army. And the British soldiers landed with the Royal Navy boats firing cannon from their bows, drove the French off, and then defeated the French army that Napoleon had abandoned.
Yeah, I think it was I might be butchering the name. Jean-Baptiste Kléber, I think, was the guy's name who was in charge. He was assassinated not long after Napoleon had left, and then I think it was Napoleon's friend Desailly, compared to Matt White, who
yes,
it was put in charge. I don't know how he escaped, but he managed to get all the way back to France. In time for
Napoleon suffered a disaster in Egypt, but somehow managed to convince the French that he'd won. And then eventually a British army went there and beat the buggery out of the French, and they all surrendered. But yeah, French history is
part of his myth was he brought back a lot of treasures from Egypt, and he said about how he had the great battle of the pyramids, the battle of the pyramids, even though they were miles from the pyramids,
miles away from him.
Yeah. I mean, Ridley Scott, sort of gave in to French propaganda there, Napoleonic propaganda there.
What a surprise!
Battles, right? But anyway, yeah. He had on the land he did have a victory against the Mamelukes in open battle just outside Cairo,
which you kind of would have expected. You'd kind of expect, like,
I mean, they were armed with most of them were armed with swords or on camelback. I mean, come on. I mean, it wasn't like you were fighting.
Most of them were on horses, actually. But yeah, I mean, infantry and artillery can beat cavalry in the Napoleonic Wars. They just can. I mean, look at Wellington or Waterloo if you want to see that. But yeah, absolutely. But yeah, no. But I don't know. I mean, I can't think Napoleon got even many things back from Egypt because he only got back with a frigate and a sloop because that was the only thing that could slip through the British blockade. To be honest,
I'm certain he brought, because I'm pretty certain it's still in the Louvre Museum to this day. I can't remember. Let me have a look. Hold on.
anyway, while AI is looking that up, the French Navy was very well aware in 1798, and this is the year we're talking about here, that on the open sea, they were not going to beat the Royal Navy. They knew this. And you have to give the French admiral some sort of kudos for realizing that. So what they did was they were in Abercur Bay, which is not so far from the Nile, which is where the battle got its name. And so what the French admiral decided to do, and of course his fleet was absolutely vital to Napoleon. It was providing Napoleon with most of his supplies and everything else that the army needed. And so the French admiral decided he was going to anchor very close inshore with cables from one French ship to another ship. So, in other words, he was going to be completely anti-naval, because French Navy wasn't a very good navy by this stage. Most of their really good officers had been guillotined or forced into exile.
Sorry, I just think because what's amazing in that is the sort of commander of the French fleet in this was from the old aristocracy who somehow survived.
He was one of the very few who survived. So he came up with this relatively sensible plan, if you're the French Navy who can't fight at sea when they're maneuvering, that you're going to anchor your ships close inshore. And that will also mean that what you can do is you can send some of your crews ashore to forage for supplies and water and so on that you need when you're anchored off Egypt. But the thing was, he didn't do it very well, to be honest.
Well, the only thing that because I think he even knew that it was best presumed because there was a peninsula on land where there was they were sort of blindside for the cannons, and they put artillery on this peninsula facing out towards the sea. Basically, it is as like a quick way method to cover the French rear.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. Anyway, Nelson eventually, after chasing all over the Mediterranean, works out where the French are and arrives with a smaller British fleet. He's got less ships, and they're not as big ships as the French. But the British sailors are much better seamen. The British officers are much better seamen. And both the officers and men are much more aggressive than the French. Like the French are kind of half beat before they start. That's really why they anchor the way they do. It's like if we meet the Royal Navy, we've got to be in this, really strong position. Otherwise, we don't stand unearthly. Whereas Nelson and his officers and seamen just looked at the French Navy and thought, food, boys, we're going to go and eat them, basically.
I mean, I think you're right. Going back to your revolution one, because of the revolution, you had like this incredible level of incompetence in the French army and then the navy of people who were, not capable and not like fully trained. But then if you take the captains in the British Navy, they were they could make decisive decisions on the spot. And I think one of the ones that was in this battle, who was definitely, I would say, a second Nelson in this, was Captain Thomas Foley of HMS Goliath.
Yeah, don't disagree at all. I think you're entirely correct.
Yeah, the thing was it. Yeah, because there was a lot more ground to be covered than the shoals or the labels.
Well, it was Goliath when because in the battle formation, the battle formation was here it is. So first Goliath. Now, if you see here, as Foley was coming round, he realised that he had room to go between the ships and the French ships and the mainland. And this meant that the British could be split and take out the French. Basically just have superiority over the French, because the French cannons weren't facing inwards; they were all facing outwards into the ocean. And I think the British.
Hang on, AI. The French had guns. The French had guns on both sides, but because they had a lot of their crews on land who were foraging and looking for water and food and supplies, they really only had enough crews on their ships to fight one side of their ships. They had guns on both sides, but they could only really fight the guns on the seaward side. And what I think AI is trying to explain to us is that the first British captain on HMS Goliath, he had sailors in the front of his ship, in the bow of his ship, tossing the lead and working out how deep the ocean was.
Yeah, that was
under his hull. He very quickly realized, I can go to the landward of these French ships, and that would mean that as Nelson's ships come up on the seaward side, I and other ships who follow me can go up on the landward side, and we can double each of these French ships, which means there will be 2 Royal Navy ships fighting every French ship, and then that ship will surrender, and then we go to the next one. That ship will surrender, and then we go to the next one. That ship will surrender. This was the brilliance of the Battle of the Nile. Sorry, AI, carry on, mate.
Sorry, Mitch, go ahead.
I was going to say, like, the original plan was basically what the French were hoping for, which was we would all go down the starboard side.
Yes.
But as Captain Foley discovered that flaw in the French battle plan, as AI would say, there'd be more space between the French ships and the shoals. That's what really screwed on.
And the thing is, Nelson, this plan was brought before him, but the problem that he had, and he was right to say this, was number one, it was the wind, because there was a strong northerly wind, which would affect the travel, but also they didn't have accurate enough maps to know if they would run aground, because of course the worst thing that could happen is they would do this tactic charts too, and they would run aground and then be just sitting ducks and be blown out of the water. And so, but obviously Foley, who had, I think he was 30 at the time. He was only 30 years old at the time. He was, but he like we mentioned earlier, he started at the age of 12, and he'd been in the service for most of his life. And he, in that split second, he knew that he had enough room just to get around there to make that decision, which I think
And the other thing, AI, and the other thing we have to make really plain about this, well, there's two things. Firstly, is the captains following Foley were brave enough that they said, well, Foley's got around, and so will we, right? So they had to be that independent. But the other thing about Admiral Lord Nelson was that he always said to his officers, so long as you bring your ship into close action with the enemy, you will do no wrong. So all of Nelson's captains knew that even slightly disobeying his orders was perfectly okay. They were never going to get in trouble for it.
Yeah, wasn't a famous quote something along the lines of "Don't never mind maneuvers, just go straight at them" as well.
Yes,
that kind
That,
of
yes.
that,
Nelson said that sort of thing all the time. And Nelson would never, ever criticize an officer who slightly deviated from his orders to even more heavily defeat the enemy. Nelson would always say, yeah, good on you, mate. No problem.
yeah. And this is a clear example. I think also if we ever, when we get around to covering the Battle of Copenhagen, a similar thing, but also Trafalgar as well as a sort of a sort of classic example. I would also say if you look at the map here, look at you'll see HMS Culloden there right at the top. Now, unfortunately, HMS Culloden did run aground. It did.
Yes,
It
she
did.
did. Yes, she did.
She ran aground. Though nobody, I don't think anybody was killed. I don't think they
No,
had
I
any
don't
deaths.
think so. I think it was too far away from the French.
But I would say if you look there, look at the HMS Orion. Look under Captain Sir James Samiras. Look how close they got to the shore there. Now that is tight. That is incredibly tight.
Brilliant seamanship. They are.
Yeah.
Like the British captains and their officers and crew were such good seamen that they could go inside this. And don't forget, the French fort, they were close enough inshore, no one could go inside of them. They really fought that because that was the limits of French seamanship. Whereas the British sailors came along and they were just so much better that they could easily sail inside them.
Yeah, and also, the French would have thought, well, there's a northerly wind, so they wouldn't even there's no way that there would be this sort of maneuver because they just wouldn't have thought it possible.
No.
But yeah.
No. But yeah, so the British were able to sail down the French fleet with some British ships on the seaward side and some British ships on the landward side of the French, and just overwhelm them one by one.
Yes,
And
because
of
the
course,
formation.
always bear in mind, but always bear in mind, just one British warship would almost always overwhelm one French warship anyway, just because the British sailors fired quicker. They did.
Yeah, I mean the first rate, the first rate ships are on paper the best ship going on in this camp. It was the French first rate, the Orient, which had how many guns was it? 100, was it 120?
Yeah,
Oh yeah, it
120.
was the biggest ship in the
120 for
whole fleet.
L'Orient.
Biggest ship
Yeah.
in the whole fleet.
And it was also
Yeah, it was absolutely the biggest one.
Yeah, it was under the Francois Bourrier and the Admiral Francois Bourrier ship as well. That was his one, and yeah, that was. I mean, if you look at any artwork, and I remember this really funny because I first was aware of this when I went to it was called the Imperial Hotel in Barnstable, and you had your paintings from Rorke's Drift. I think there was paintings of Gallipoli, so it was like all these battles from the involving British soldiers and the Empire soldiers. Yeah, and this I think actually it's probably this one. There was a couple of them as well, but during the fighting, the Orion was struck, and it hit the ammunition on the ship, and the ship just blew up.
A fire AI started on Leorian, and eventually it reached her magazines, and the whole ship blew up, which is the picture that I've put on the screen at the moment.
Yeah,
and the explosion was so enormous that for about 15 or 20 minutes the battle stopped because both sides were so stunned.
Yeah,
this enormous 120 gun warship had just exploded. And then, of course, the British ships, because they were British ships, sent ship's boats to try and rescue some of the survivors from the Orion.
Yeah, I mean, 90% of the crew died in that. I mean, and the ones that survived who were in the ocean were either severely burned or scarred, or I don't know if how many actually survived the injuries. Interesting enough, though, you had French soldiers stationed inland who could, beyond Alexandria, heard the explosion.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, just as a side point, it's worth noting Lorient also contained Napoleon's money. So, on the financial side
Yeah,
of
he wasn't happy. All the gold went down with the Orient because it was the biggest French warship there. And as Mitch correctly says, all of the money for Napoleon's campaign was on that ship, and it all went to the bottom of the sea.
Yeah, I mean, total loss for Napoleon. I mean, just a complete loss.
Absolutely, yeah, no, absolutely. It was the Battle of the Nile was a total disaster for the French, and as I said earlier, Napoleon ended up slinking away with a few of his senior officers on a frigate and a brig, basically. And that was the only thing. And he abandoned his army totally. But then, of course, he did something quite similar in Russia in 1812. I mean, Napoleon was not what I would describe as a good guy, to be honest.
He's a French version of Nigel Farage, or I should say, Nigel Farage.
Well done, AI. Well done. Yeah. And Farage is a Huguenot after all. But yeah, okay. You might even have a point there, mate. Yeah,
I mean, to be fair to Napoleon, I mean, for most of his youth, he didn't consider him and the French people of the same people. He was not, he
was more Italian than French in many respects. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, he spoke French with a heavy Corsican accent that forever marks him out as a stranger because he wasn't particularly good at languages apparently. And yeah, it's kind of like Stalin because Stalin had a heavy Georgian accent, which is known for being high pitched compared to other Russian accents. So it's one of those things where it forever marks him out as somewhat being an out group while also being part of the in group in a way. And
yeah, the French adopt him, Mitch, but would he really have thought of himself as French? I don't know, really, to be honest.
I mean, in the Italian campaign, he went from Napoleone Bonaparte to Napoleon Bonaparte, so he did try to promote it. But he tried to do this with Egypt, where he tried to say, "Oh, I accept some precepts of Islam," so he does it all over the place.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean,
absolutely.
In Egypt, he did become obsessed with, Alexander the Great, because of course he would, he knew all that he was obsessed with Alexander the Great anyway, and so I think a lot of the Egypt stuff he didn't really care about the military side of it. He just wanted to, find he wanted to go basically on an Ortis like spree of like finding his heroes and stuff like that, tombs of his heroes and people like that. So I don't. I was actually looking at things that he treasured, which he brought back was just etchings of like hieroglyphics. Just I mean, all of these men for like etchings of hieroglyphics and stuff. Which
Well, look, originally at the Battle of the Nile, Britain had 14 ships of the line and a sloop, and the French had 13 ships of the line and 4 frigates. Although it has to be said that most of the French ships of the line were a bit bigger than the British ones, and the French flagship was twice as big as any of the British ships. The result of the battle was that the French lost 9 ships of the line captured, 2 ships of the line destroyed, and 2 frigates destroyed. Britain lost 218 killed, 670 odd wounded. The French lost somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 killed and about probably 3,000 to 4,000 wounded. And the French fleet was totally destroyed. So there was no comparison in the battle to the result. Like it was a complete and utter British Royal Navy victory and a Nelson victory.
I do feel sorry for the sloop, sloop of war HMS Mutine. Under command Thomas Hardy, because he didn't get to partake in the battle. Instead, he had to assist the Culloden. So he didn't get to. He was like had to clear up Thomas Trowbridge's mess or something. So,
but he played a great part in Trafalgar, of course, in 1805.
Yes.
Just 7 years later, so
I mean, like, another thing about the battle was so, for example, the first ship to strike the colours was Conqueror, if I'm pronouncing that right, where the first got demasted, and then not long after they had to strike their colours because it was like, then you have for example, you have Swiftsure and Alexander, I believe. They enter the battle. They nearly fire on HMS Bellerophon because they're going past L'Orient. So there were cases of like nearly friendly fire, such as was a bit like so margin of error in terms of some of the navigating around the geography.
It's not difficult to do friendly fire in war, mate. Anyone who's got anything to do with modern war will tell you avoiding that is like much more difficult than people think it is.
Yeah, and also you got facts of the battles being waged largely at night, so you can imagine coordination was quite a challenge. And the fact that there wasn't massive friendly fire on our side kind of tells you how damn good the quality of our crewmen were.
Yeah, 100%.
Yep,
yeah, the officers and crew were exceptional in Nelson's Navy. They really were. They were like first class, 100%.
I mean, on the French side with Bruet, who was on the Orient, he was a veteran of the Chesapeake battle during the American Wars of Independence. So he was. I mean, I think he was the only experienced French officer. I don't even was the Commodore. Who was that? The present.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, I think. Well, actually, no. I tell a lie. It was Aristide du Petit Tours, which was the Commodore. He had experience as well at previous other battles during the Revolution Wars as well. but I mean, he was killed anyway. I mean, both of them were killed. But the Bure, he was, if I remember correctly, cannons ripped his legs off.
Yep,
That
they
that
did.
cannons ripped his legs off. I mean, he a lot of the captains on the ship were
he had
killed.
himself AI. He had himself stuck into a cannon full of gunpowder to slow the bleeding down, which probably would have stung a bit, I'm guessing. But
Yeah, and
Yeah.
at the same time, Nelson got hit by a splinter, I believe, on his forehead, and he thought that was the end. Like, I think that was the part where AI referenced earlier, where Nelson thought he was just about to die when he got hit by a splinter on the
yeah,
head.
Yeah,
they've killed him finally, Nelson said. But in fact, of course, he was wrong. They hadn't. But yeah.
what he told he told Edward, was it Captain Edward Berry? You know, he said that they've killed me. And he sort of said, "Well, tell my wife." And you know, he was like, "Oh, calm down. Let's take you below deck and stitch you back up again. It's okay."
Nelson was
And
always inclined to be a little dramatic, to be honest.
yeah, no, well, it's of that. It's quite common of that sort of time period. You know, you know, like when you or what was it? If Mitch, or I don't know if you've ever played Empire Total War. On the loading screens, you have like last words of like these military or politicians of the time, and it's usually like oh my God, I'm dead, or something like that, or I have been struck down. Such a disappointment, or something like that. Final words. So yeah, just a scratch, mate.
Yeah, no, I think Nelson was a bit inclined to be a bit dramatic sometimes. But on the other hand, such a brilliant naval commander with and like didn't lack guts in the slightest degree. I mean, he probably wouldn't have been killed at Trafalgar if he hadn't worn all these decorations. You know?
Well, you see, before the battle, he stated, and this was his sort of famous quote. Just this is to his ship's officers. He says, "Before this time tomorrow, I shall have gained a peerage or Westminster Abbey." So he was all in. He was preparing to die for this. He was
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
he was
That
people who.
that was Nelson. There was a feminine bit about Nelson which he didn't just want to die. He didn't just want to win. He wanted to be famous for winning, and I've never understood that about him, to be honest. I just wish, like, you know, I mean, I'm sure Lady Hamilton was a good big tick girl and all the rest of it, but did it really matter about that? Probably not a lot, to be honest. You know,
I think
I would have sooner Nelson survived the battle and then could have done other good things for Britain afterwards. You know.
I mean, if you look at like the European courts and your British courts, and like the sort of, I guess you could say, like the party court circuit of the time, because he wasn't part of the nobility or aristocracy, he would have been treated as an outsider. But for this sort of amazing victory, for him,
Yeah, there was
eh,
yeah, and bear in mind, this was the third of his amazing victories, and that's even if you ignore his thing on the glorious 1st of June when he took his second rate up to a Spanish second rate, boarded the Spanish second rate, captured it, and then used that Spanish second rate to board a Spanish first rate, board and capture that. I mean, Nelson by this stage was like such a brilliant sea officer that it didn't matter that he wasn't part of the aristocracy by this stage.
it didn't
Yeah,
after this. I mean
yeah.
after after the battle, in St. Petersburg or in the young American Republic or anywhere in Europe and in the Ottoman court, it was all like, for a while, it was all like the talk of the town. This
Yeah.
was only thing because it was such a monumental, um, like, bludgeoning for the French. I mean, and also on a side note, because France was still, the Revolutionary Republic, and the legacy of Robespierre and the crazy, I would say, like, atheistic liberal lunacy that went on there was still present in forms. Some of those captains, the French captains that were killed, were Freemasons, and were member of various societies
Oh yeah. Yeah.
which were
For
very
sure.
pro republicanism and liberal ideas, who were all killed. So I mean, especially for the aristocracy of Europe, this was, this was like a evil, good versus evil triumph.
100%. Yeah. No, 100%. Now Nelson always said that all he cared about was the king and Britain. That's the only thing he ever cared about. Like, I want a victory for my king and for the British people, and that's all he cared about. And that was one reason he was an enormous hero, and people need to understand that Nelson wasn't just an enormous hero for the aristocracy of the country, or even for the Royal Navy officers. Nelson was an enormous hero for the ordinary British sailors. They all loved him because Nelson was not a flogging captain. He wasn't, not at all. Like, Nelson always, one of the famous things said of Nelson was he would say, but you have to understand that in an old-fashioned Royal Navy ship, the sailors lived before the mast, before the main mast, and the officers lived abaft, behind the main mast. And Nelson famously said, before the mast, the greater bravery, and behind the mast, the greater honor. So in other words, there's more honor if you're a Royal Navy officer, but actually the sailors were probably braver than their officers. And Nelson said that publicly. And the ordinary Royal Navy sailors loved Nelson, like, because he cared about them and he didn't flog them badly or any of these other lies that we see in modern movies about the Royal Navy. Like, flogging wasn't as common in the Royal Navy as people say it was, and there were many Royal Navy sailors who deliberately served in the Royal Navy because it was actually in some ways, it was a better job than the Merchant Navy. And many of these guys were also like patriots,
Wasn't a lot of like like the whole mythology of the homosexuality in Navy? Isn't that like more of an American thing? I always thought that was like an American.
Yeah, it's a lie, and the person who made that quite famous was, of course, the vile Winston Churchill, who knew nothing about he knew nothing about the Royal Navy. Like, his military experience was commanding a troop of about 30 cavalrymen. That was his total military experience, and he knew nothing about the Navy. He was the political head of the Royal Navy, and it was Churchill who said that the traditions of the Royal Navy were rum, sodomy, and the lash. And what Nelson knew about the Royal Navy, what Churchill knew about the Royal Navy was not worth knowing, in my honest opinion. But, of course it was nonsense. But yeah, Churchill was the one who said about rum, sodomy, and the lash. But what Churchill knew about the Navy wasn't worth knowing. Churchill probably got more Royal Navy sailors killed than Kaiser Bill and Hitler combined, to be honest, because of his stupid ideas. But then I'm no fan of Churchill. So there we go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think like a big chunk of the French fleet in this battle they got taken as spoils of war, I believe. Like they would have been taken uh
Oh
as
yeah, 9 of the ships did. Nine of the French ships of the line out of 14 out of 13 were captured. And bear in mind that every Royal Navy sailor got prize money for every enemy ship they captured. And obviously, captains got a lot more money than lieutenants, and lieutenants got a lot more money than ordinary sailors. But everyone in the British fleet got some money from capturing those ships. And it was
yeah, and
it was perfectly possible as a Royal Navy sailor to do a couple of commissions on a Royal Navy frigate, for example, that captured a lot of enemy ships. And you could come home with enough money to buy like an inn or a pub, which is why you have so many inns and pubs in Britain today that are called Captain somebody or Admiral somebody, because generally those blokes used to name them after their captain or their admiral.
yeah, and also another thing was so I can imagine after this battle a lot of officers got promoted, especially someone like James Foley, I think his name was, or Thomas Foley, whichever of Goliath, because the Royal Navy back was of seniority, like how Nelson got promoted after Cape St. Vincent because of his initiative with dealing with Spanish fleet.
Yeah, and that was even under the command of a famously bad-tempered Royal Navy admiral. But he couldn't be that bad-tempered with Nelson, because Nelson was just so bloody brilliant,
Well, I mean, Jarvis displayed initiative at Cape St. Vincent himself when he said, "Oh, I don't care if there's 50 sail before me. I will sail through them if needs be, or worse about first."
Yep,
So,
100%.
so it's rather like a chip off the old block, and also because Nelson got promoted to the seniority system. I thought it was a merit-based promotion, but now that's how Nelson got promoted to Rear Admiral. And then you can imagine a lot of his supporters, his band of brothers, as we call them, like Collingwood and Berry and others, like Solveray, I think his name was, from
Yep,
Guernsey, I
yep,
think it was.
yep,
Got,
yep. Sumerez, yeah, Sumerez, yeah. I know the bloke you're talking about, man. Yeah, absolutely. Nelson was just so exceptional. He deserves his damn great column in Trafalgar Square, even though he's now in the middle of a non-British city. He still deserves his damn great column. Any final thoughts, gents?
Shall we read out the battle formations?
Go for it.
Go for it. So this is the order of battle. So for the British fleet, for Rear Admiral Nelson's fleet, the battle formation was at the front was the third-rate HMS Goliath under the command of Captain Thomas Foley. All right, and then followed was the third-rate under HMS Zealous under Captain Samuel Hood. And then you had which we mentioned earlier, the HMS Orion under Captain Sir James Semires. And then HMS Theseus under Captain Ralph Willett Miller. Then you had HMS Vanguard, which is, of course, Nelson's ship, under with Captain Edward Berry. And you had HMS Minotaur, which was under Captain Thomas Louis. HMS Defence. Again, this is all third rate under Captain John Peyton. And then you had HMS Bellefonds under Captain Henry Derby, HMS Majestic, which was under Captain George Blagden Westcott, who was killed during the battle. I think he was the only British captain killed during the battle.
I think you're right, man. I think you're right.
Yeah, HMS Lender under Captain Thomas Thompson, who was already a quite known captain in the Revolutionary Wars. He was present for most of the American wars of independence on the British side, so he was known in that regard. HMS Alexander, you had Captain Alexander Ball, and had quite. I think HMS Alexander had it was actually quite heavily damaged. The mast was quite heavily damaged during that one. And then you had HMS Swiftsure under Captain Benjamin Hallowell, and then as we mentioned, Culloden and HMS Culloden.
Have you noticed AI? Have you noticed AI? Have you noticed anything about this? This list of ships' captains you're reading. Have you noticed anything about them? Have you noticed anybody
there's a lot of Thomas. A lot of Thomases.
Yeah, I was gonna. Yeah, absolutely. But have you noticed there's no Zia Yusuf?
Yeah.
There's no like Islamic names in any of those captains. It's funny that, isn't it?
I mean, the only foreignish name I guess you could say is James Ramirez.
But he's a Channel Islander.
He's a Channel Island. Yeah,
he's a Channel.
Guernsey. Yeah.
Yeah, he's from Guernsey. That's the only reason he's got that name. He's from Guernsey, which is absolutely totally British. So and he was actually an excellent admiral, by the way. Eventually.
Yeah. No, and.
But yeah, he just comes from Guernsey. That's why he's got a Frenchy name.
No, and the last two, Culloden and stuff, we know they didn't actually take part in the battle. They were stuck before the battle took place. On the French side, so I think we should talk about the French. We should talk about the French.
The few survivors, yeah.
Yeah, let's go for the French one. The French one. So this was Vice Admiral Brier's fleet, and this is the line of battle. So you had there's a third race ship, the Guerrier, under Captain Jean-Francois Timothy Trulou. I mean, just to let you know, everyone, all these ships basically suffered horrific damages and many casualties. So I won't need to go along there.
And 9 of them were captured by the Royal Navy. 9 were captured by the Royal Navy, and 2 blew up or sank. So yeah, this well.
No, the Guerrier that was captured, but it was later destroyed because it was just so badly damaged. It wasn't worth. It just wasn't worth continuing. You also had the other third rate was the Concordiant under Captain Etienne de Bardi, who was killed. You had the Spartatade under Captain Maurice Julien Umuri. He survived the battle. You had the Aquilion, Captain Anton René Trevand, who was killed during the battle. You had the Papillon Sovereign under Captain Pierre Paul Ricard. Now he survived.
Imagine calling your ship the Butterfly, for God's sake. But
yeah. You had the Franklin. That was the third rate. That was under Armand Blacquat Duchel, and he was the no, he was a count. I think he was from the lesser nobility, and he was the rank of well, he was rear admiral. They call it what was it admiral, which basically means counter admiral, but it means rear admiral. Just for
Yeah,
people
rear
to
admiral. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, you had the Orient, which was the mentioned the first rate, the Orient, sorry, the Orient, under the Vice Admiral Bureus, and that was the one that you see in the image that just blew up.
Yep. Biggest
You
ship in
then
the whole battle.
biggest ship,
120 guns.
yeah. We had the Tonnant, which was under Commodore uh, uh, Aristide About de Pelletois, was third rate. He was killed. I mean, all these people were just killed. I believe that they were towards the sort of center,
Yep.
and these ships we're talking about now were in the proximity of the Orient. So when I mean, all these captains, and the Toniant suffered really heavy casualties. Again, like 90% killed. And the ones
British
that
fired their
survived,
guns twice. The British fired their guns twice as fast as the French. This was a
it just
disadvantage to the French.
yeah. I mean, this is just what happens, really. You had the Heriu, third rate under Captain Jean Pierre Etan. Didn't suffer as well, yeah. I think this towards like the rear of the attack. So
Yeah,
these ships were
the two that got away, were both down the back and cut their cables to run away, basically, and that's
yeah.
the only reason. That's the only reason they weren't captured or destroyed. They ran away, but
Yeah, I mean
whatever.
the Hero, the Hero and the Mercure, the Hero and the Mercure that were both grounded. So they sort of avoided the worst of the destruction. I mean, they were
Lack of seamanship, lack of seamanship,
yeah,
lack of
uh,
seamanship. You see.
I mean, by the way, the captain of the Hero, Jean Pierre Etan. Do you know what his profession was before like the revolution?
No, I dread to think.
Well, to be fair, he was just a cabin boy, but he was, and then the ship's apprentice and sailor. He did go through. He did go through the rank, but he went from, basically from aide pilot straight upwards.
Ah, right, okay, to captain. Yeah.
Yeah, basically, yeah. He got. I mean, and this did happen, unfortunately, for some, and it's why Napoleon rose the ranks so quickly. Is all of the competent officers from the before the revolution were just either guillotined or fled. This is just what
Yeah,
happened.
that's
Yeah,
basically what happened. Yeah, whereas the Royal Navy had the complete opposite. And if you were a educated and competent sailor, you could become an officer.
I
Highly
mean,
possible, as Captain Cook did.
Even
Can
Napoleon.
can I just interrupt you 1 second, Aya?
Yeah.
I am now spending a reasonable amount of money on using the higher StreamYards thing, and also on X, on Twitter. Guys, I'm going to shill a bit, right? Please do support this channel. You can do it by subscribing to the channel, by liking the stream, which neither of which costs you anything, or if you want, you can actually send us a support or a super chat via Entropy. And yeah, please do that. Sorry, I carry on, man.
Yeah, so the mentioned the Mercure again, They were captured on the 2nd of August, but it was grounded, so they couldn't do much about that. It was just burnt down. You had the Guinea Montel, which was that escaped. So that was one of the ones that escaped. Pierre Charles excuse me, Villeneuve, who was also present at. Now he became vice admiral. He was the French commander at Trafalgar. And so he basically saw the capabilities of Nelson firsthand. Of course, he was captured at Trafalgar, but he was, he sort of lived to tell the tale, as it was. So
For
yeah,
a while, I'm pretty sure Napoleon had him killed eventually, but yeah, okay. I mean,
yeah,
after Trafalgar, I think Napoleon almost certainly had him killed.
yeah, possibly. It wouldn't surprise. It, I mean, he what was it? He had like 5 stab wounds in his lung and heart. Yeah, he killed himself. He stabbed himself up.
Yeah, had nothing to do with Napoleon, honestly.
Yeah, he's like that Dr. David Kelly. He shot himself back. He slit his wrists and and everything else just
He
outside
just
of.
kept stabbing himself
Yeah,
until he couldn't stab himself anymore. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
Sounds about right. Yeah, sounds about right. um, and then the other one to escape was the Generayon, under Captain Louis Jean Nicolas Le Jolly, and yeah, he survived. Though he did die a
He
year
did.
later. He died a year later. He wasn't. Again, he was one of the few. He was the one of the few that actually served during the American Revolutionary Wars, and so he had a bit of experience, but he wasn't. He wasn't from nobility. He was just his family were. He came from like a sailing family, so he was
Yeah,
not.
yeah.
But he
And
was quite.
and of course, it's worth pointing out the only French ships that got away were ones right at the opposite end of the line to where the Royal Navy attacked them, which are at the top of the picture. And the only French ships that got away were at the bottom of the picture because they ran away before the Royal Navy got to them, basically. And that's the only way they survived. But yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, it's funny. The two experienced French captains were the ones that said, "Nah, sod this, we're out."
Yep. This is not
We're out.
going well. Our whole fleet is being destroyed. We're going to fuck off. Yes. Mitch has left us, by the way. And thanks, Mitch, for coming on. Always very welcome, mate. Yeah, absolutely right. Anything else for final points, AI?
I just saw on the legacy of this. It did. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, any French expansion in the Med was stopped. It did cement British, the start. I mean, we already had Gibraltar at this point, but with Malta and everything else, it did.
We took Malta at the time of this. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, we took Malta. So at this time, it did sort of cement the British control and also influence over Egypt, the relationship with the Ottomans and the Arabs. So you can see, like, for later empire, the sort of later empire exploits, you can see the it all setting up here. Napoleon. Before this, any invasion of mainland Britain was, not really possible. I mean, after this, it was unimaginable. It just couldn't be done. The French Navy was
I
absolutely.
think I think Jervis, who said, "I do not say the French cannot come. I merely say they cannot come by sea."
Yes, they couldn't. Absolutely.
I think that was Jervis. I think that was Jervis.
Yeah, I mean, I have got some. This is from a seaman on the Goliath called John Nicol, who I think his account is usually mentioned in every documentary and like history book going on this. But he says this is from the following morning after the battle. And he says, I went on deck to view the state of the fleet, and an awful sight it was. The whole bay was covered in dead bodies, mangled, wounded, and scorched. Not a bit of clothes on them except their trousers. So I mean, and this was mainly the French and
French people.
the French sailors. And it was unimaginable defeat, and it did cut. Let's be honest. I think it did cut the Napoleon's exploits in Egypt to an end. It did sort of cut. It did sort of.
Oh yeah,
It was
Napoleon
completely
soon
over.
afterwards ran away. Napoleon soon afterwards abandoned his army and ran away because he knew that was the end of his army. They had no fleet supporting them anymore. And as I say, I think it was 2 or 3 days ago now, the Royal Navy then landed a British army in Egypt, which in very short order defeated the French.
Yeah. Now, apparently, according to the General Secretary, this is for Napoleon, a chap called Louis Anton Félix de Brunei, who was a diplomat. He was sort of went with Napoleon in Italy and stuff. Now, this is what Napoleon said upon hearing the news. He said, first of all, he sort of got cross, angry, shouting, crying, went through all the ranges of emotion. And then he settled with, we no longer have a fleet. Well, we must either remain in this country or quit as
You're
its great. Sorry, Andrew, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're fine, but you're breaking up a little bit, mate.
Sorry, the General Secretary to Napoleon said that when Napoleon got the message of the destruction of the fleet, he went through periods of shouting, crying, went through all the emotions, and then he settled with this to his officers, Napoleon's officers, saying, we no longer have a fleet. Well, we must either remain in this country or quit it as great as the ancients. And then he sort of he just sort of finished with, just referring to Breuer as just saying, oh, unfortunate Breuer, what have you done? So,
Yeah,
he didn't really.
absolutely, absolutely correct. AI, anything you would like to plug before we close?
No, I'm just my channel and this and everything, and I'm guessing the next logical step would be the Battle of Copenhagen.
Yeah, I'll happily do that, mate. I will happily do that.
Yeah,
and
then
if you would like to do that, I will happily do that. I've said that. Look, I'm happy to cover British military history, But yeah, certainly I want to cover British naval history, and also I'd like to cover some like British industrial inventions and science and all this kind of stuff, because there's actually a lot of really good British stuff from that as well. But yeah,
There is actually, Andrew. Before we head off, there is one.
um,
There is one. There is
someone
one.
is AI. Sorry, someone is asking AI for you to put your channel link in the chat. Do that. I mean, I'll put it in as the chat after the stream, but if you want to put it in there now, go for it.
Yeah, sure. I'll put it into the chat for people now. But I was going to say, as a future possible stream, the Wolseley expedition in Canada would be now not. The trouble is that would be an incredibly
Oh,
short
the Red
stream.
River,
The Red
the
River.
Red River expedition.
Yeah, the Red River one.
Yeah,
Now that would be a very short
yeah,
stream because
the Red River expedition.
because if we're honest, nothing much really happened. But it was. I mean, let's be honest. A couple thousand British Canadian across, you know, effectively frontier land with with no
The
casualties.
middle of the Midwest, in Canada. Yep.
Yeah, no
Yeah, that's
roads, no
interesting.
casualties.
Vex Peril saying, "Where's Mitch?" Had it on. Yep, they went down rivers, absolutely. But yeah, Vex Peril says, "Where's Mitch?" Had it on his toes. No, Mitch had to go, and I actually said he had to go, but So yeah, you can see AI Shire Homelander, the link. Let me put it on the screen. That's AI's channel. Go and check him out. But it will be in a comment that is pinned under the subscription later. So yeah. All right, guys. I think we've probably covered this battle well enough. It was a really great British Nelson and Royal Navy victory. Any final thoughts, AI?
No, and I think we're gonna have to do when we do get round to Trafalgar. That will have to be a very special sort of one with guests, and because that's that. I mean, that let's be honest. That even though
Oh yeah,
I think, even though this one I think is probably even better, like just in the way the outcome of the battle
in
and the
some
tactics used.
respects, yeah.
Yeah, the tactics used. I will admit. I mean, let's be honest. Trafalgar is the big one. It is the ultimate, finale.
Yeah, but we've also got to do Copenhagen, and at some point we've got to do the glorious 1st of June and Nelson's Peyton Bridge for boarding first rates. We have to do those as well. So yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely.
All right, guys, I'm gonna end us with a tune. Actually, before I do that, let me check our entropy. All right, we don't have any super chats. So on that case, I'm going to end. Bum, 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 Let's see if this is going to work. It should. Hopefully, yeah.
The 9th day of August in the year of 98, we'll sing the praise of Nelson and the bold British fleet. For the victory we have gained, oh, boys, will bid adieu. So come, you British stars, let your hands and hearts agree to protect the lives and liberties of the mother country. At 4 o'clock that evening we brought that fleet in sight, and like undaunted heroes we were eager for the fight. They were lying at an anchor near the Egyptian shore, superior to the British fleet, and to take us they made sure. So come, you hands and hearts of teas of the mother country. Our noble captain, he was slain soon after we began. Brave Cuthbert in succession, he boldly took command. For full 4 hours that evening, we engaged them on the main, and early the next morning we renewed the fight again. So come, you British stars, let your hands and hearts agree to protect the lives and liberties of the mother country. Full 50 seamen we had slain, which grieved our wounded, lay bleeding in their gore. But early the next morning, most glorious to see, our British ships of war, brave boys, were crowned with victory. So come, you British stars, let your hands and hearts agree to protect the lives and liberties of the mother country. And now the fight is o'er. 9 sails we took, and 4 we burnt, the rest they ran away. But when we come home to England, so loudly we will sing, success to our Majesty, boys, and long live George the King. So come, you British stars, let your hands and hearts agree to protect the lives and liberties of the mother country. So come, you British stars, let your hands and hearts agree to protect the lives and liberties of the mother country.
There you go. That was a traditional British song from the time of the Battle of the Nile in 1798. Thank you very much to my guests, AI, and also to Mitch. Can't do these streams on my own. I'm not very good at streaming on my own, I gotta say. Thank you for everyone in the chat for joining us. We will be back on Saturday with Splendid Isolation number 214, which it covers current events, news, and politics. And yeah, we've been doing it for 214 weeks now, so there you go. So come and join us on Saturday British time, which is early Sunday morning Eastern Australian time, 2100 GMT. And in the meantime, please do like the stream and subscribe to the channel. And in the meantime, don't let the bastards get you down. Go well, boys. We'll see you soon.
Good night.